I do think this needs to be repeated a lot because a lot of people haven't really caught on to this fact. I think I might be the only YouTube channel who's covered this story extensively since I became aware it was a thing. Steam charts are botted, right? One of the things that a lot of people have been using to weaponize like irrelevant games like Helldivers 2 is point to the Steam play stuff like Helldivers 2 and Pow World is look at the Steam player charts. Is that like, oh, this is the highest player count that any game has achieved ever until the next game comes along, right? It was a really stupid marketing tool for like a couple of years, for a year or so, right? And a lot of like really irrelevant games like really got pushed through this ridiculous metric, right? Helldivers 2, Power World, and among them, Baldur's Gate 3, one of the worst games of 2023. This was the thing that people used to pretend the game was popular, that it was like something that a lot of people were enjoying, that it was something that like was going to establish itself as a classic. This is going to be one of the best games of all time. Like, look at the player counts, bro. But when you actually look at the numbers and compare them to the Steam achievement charts, right? When you look at like what's the numbers that are put out there. Like it's really interesting seeing just how few people have finished like Act One. Something like 50% of people have played Act One. So it's like, okay, like if all these people are playing Baldur's Gate 3, how exactly have they not finished the first part of the game? Right? Like the narrative is that like Act One is so good that people don't want to move on with the rest of the game, but that's not how this works, bro. Like people are gonna progress like even by accident, if they're playing it that long. The reality is, and I think this is very, very safe to say, is that Baldur's Gate 3 was not as successful as it was purported to be, right? It did not sell more than the highest selling games that year, right? It wasn't particularly well received by players, and it wasn't that relevant, right? It wasn't that popular, right? It wasn't played that much. Like I do think this is very self-evident with how quickly the game has fallen off over the past several months, but the game just doesn't have an organic player base. Everything about this game and Helldivers 2 and Power World was pushed by bots. Bots talking about the game, bots propping up the Steam player charts, bots like playing the game even probably. Like again, it's becoming increasingly evident to me that the big games on Twitter, the games that people obsess over and like say are the greatest ever, the games that win game awards, stuff like Alan Wake 2, like this stuff is not these games are not something that people actually play or care about. It's becoming increasingly obvious to me. And I think all you have to do to prove that's the case with Baldur's Gate 3 is just look at what Hasbro did after the game came out. They fired all their staff. They cut ties with Larian. Like there's no plans for a sequel, right? Is that the behavior of a studio that had like one of the biggest hits of all time? Like I remember back when people were trying to tell me that like Baldur's Gate 3 sold like 34 million units in like 3 months or some crap. Like if that was true, it'd be like one of the best selling games of all time. But it wasn't true. Like not even close. Like now the more extravagant estimates are more like around 15 million, but even that I think is being very overly generous because the game just didn't maintain its relevancy. It wasn't it wasn't pulling in players outside of its very very specific niche of D&D liberal D&D nerds, wokes, like wokies, right? Like outside of that very small demographic of people who only care about like supporting woke games because they're woke games, Baldur's Gate 3 had no audience. It wasn't impressive, it wasn't fun, it wasn't memorable, it wasn't interesting. It's not something people will come back to over and over again. Like it was a game that was shilled purely because it wasn't a Nintendo game. So, with that in mind, um, how exactly can we prevent this kind of thing from happening in the future? Simply stop engaging with people who are obsessively pushing some product, because we've seen this with real gamers, right? People like me who play games all the time, where like even if you play something like that's an absolute banger, you know, something like The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, like you are simply going to move on to the next game. Now, you are going to acknowledge Tears of the Kingdom is a great game, one of the best of all time, something that like is something that does deserve credit for what it's done, but like you are going to talk about other games. Like the thing about Baldur's Gate 3, and I think this is true for a lot of these big like game of the year contender games, is that the audience for this stuff don't play a whole lot of games. If you don't play a whole lot of games, then you don't have the credibility, the credentials to properly evaluate them. Like the people who propped up Baldur's Gate 3 as a masterpiece are people who did not play Fire Emblem Engage, or Cereza and the Lost Demon, or The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, or Super Mario Bros. Wonder, or WarioWare Move It, or Super Mario RPG, or all of like the numerous better Nintendo games that came out that year. Right? Like that is the reality of Baldur's Gate 3. That is the reality behind like From Slot fans, like the Elden Ring community. Like that is the reality among like gaming YouTubing in general, is that these people are completely out of touch with what makes a great video game.